Well, once you've got your sermon plans in place, you've got to decide what resources you're going to use in order to be able to produce the sermon. Um, Most of us want to use something more than is just in our hearts and our heads. And there's a lot of discussion I have been observing going on about what resources are useful. I got to say, what resources are useful for one person can be of little value for another. But almost everybody wants to hear about new possibilities and see if that'll be useful to them. So here are the key resources I use for preaching. The first is, and when I'm getting ready and looking at resources, my desk will look like this, piled up with books and materials. Um, the first resource I use in getting ready to execute my plan for preaching is the United Methodist Music and Worship Planner, sort of a spiral-bound book published every year. There's an ecumenical version of it called Prepare, and its subtitle is Weekly Worship Plan Book for Pastors and Musicians. The United Methodist version will have the United Methodist revisions of the lectionary and hymns suggestions from the United Methodist hymnal and Book of Worship materials as well. The ecumenical has the same lectionary or variants for other denominations, and it has hymn suggestions from the hymnals of other major denominations, some 8 or 10 of them. And so I used this book when I was a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and I've used this book in United Methodist planning. The books are about the same. They start out for every week. You've got 2 pages. I don't know if you can see it very much, but on the one side are printed the texts for the day. I find it very helpful. No paging around through the Bible and bookmarking. They're all right here on one page. It's great for doing my preparation. And on the other side, and you can see I write all over in these things, maybe you can't see, are hymn suggestions, and some of them are useful, some aren't. Other worship suggestions, I rarely find those useful myself, but this book is my basic first thing that I turn to every, actually in my planning process. This is where I skim the text, this is where I read them and make my plans from. Other resources I use, I never learned Hebrew, but I did learn Greek, and I use my Greek New Testament. I must admit, I can't read Greek very well anymore, but I can puzzle through words and sentences, and sure like to consult, at least for the specific text I've chosen, make sure I try to puzzle through it in the original language if I'm preaching from the New Testament, of course. Then I turn to commentaries, and we all have our different choices of commentaries. I much prefer scholarly commentaries. Ones that I use, some of them probably starting to get a little dated, I get a lot of use out of the Old Testament library published by Westminster. Many of them are quite excellent volumes, and I turn to some over and over, like this one, Von Rad on Genesis, and Childs on Exodus, maybe, in my view, one of the best biblical commentaries ever written. On New Testament sources might be, frequently I'll consult books in published by Doubleday, the Anchor Bible series. Brown's commentary on John that I have open here, I refer to every single time. The Gospel of John is in the readings, and a variety of others as well. I have found much use out of the New Interpreter's Bible, published by Abingdon. It's too heavy to carry around. You only want to use it at your office. But not only has commentary, but then reflections afterward. Hugely better than the First Interpreter's Bible. If you had ever seen that, I never thought that was of value at all. So I'll use commentary. Some of them I'll go to over and over again, but I will try in a series on whatever it is. Romans in a certain period, I always will try to read one new book if I can. which does a good deal for helping me keep learning new things. In reference, I use the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible and key theological texts I've read. I get material out of my own database. I've kept a database for, I don't know, 50 years on poetry, drama, novels I've read, little quotes, little stories, sometimes from other genres as well. Preaching helps, I know, are quite popular, and I would like to hold up for one, but can't. I do have a few right here. I know it's very popular these days is Feasting on the Word, and I own the series. And there are others that are probably not quite as good in my view. Sometimes I get a few ideas out of those places, but I'm often disappointed. Often the best material is derivative from elsewhere. So I like to read, the good original scholarly stuff myself. And then finally, there are online resources. I'm going to try and show you a few that I have found helpful and let you actually see them here on my other screen if I can. The first is for picking out hymns. I don't read music, and I do find being able to hear the music helpful. And I often go to this place, hymnary.org. Last week I used the song Go Down Moses and wanted to make sure it was what I remembered it. And you can go right here and play the MIDI tune of any hymn that you search for and hear it and make sure it's going to be something you want to use. A second place I often go is so it is related to some United Methodist agency, but it's very ecumenical. It's called Ministry Matters. I use this for planning worship services actually more than sermons. I don't get much out of their stuff on preaching, but the section on prayers and litanies, they will have two authors writing for each week, and each one will have about 4 selections of liturgical material that sometimes I find quite helpful. Sometimes I use quite a bit that I find there. For preaching, however, I haven't found anything on the internet better than this site. This is called The Text This Week. The Text This Week. And they have an entry for every week, as it says, and it looks like this. They'll have the readings for the various different revisions of the lectionary that are out there. They will have a collection of articles on, they'll have the readings in various formats, then they'll have collections of different things that might be helpful. I find this section on commentary, exegesis, and so on often quite good. Other articles, a few of them in subscription things you won't be able to see, but most of them you can. And an immense amount of material, overwhelming amount. Some sermons, I almost never look at this stuff. I'm not much interested in seeing others' sermons and having it influence me, and other kinds of things that might be useful. Some graphics and multimedia. This is just an unbelievably great resource on the internet, and I have gotten much value out of it. When at a church with a modern service, we've subscribed to many different places to get videos for sermons, for services, and for sermon illustrations. Sermon Spice is one we used a lot. It is a subscription service, and it is a little conservative, rather conservative, but we often found videos that we would use. They're in sermons, in services, as well as some other materials. That's about all I want to show you on online resources. Every denomination almost has an online sermon resource as well that you can consult. I've never really found too many of them be useful to me, but they might be to you. The key point as you look for stuff, particularly in the internet, is that I would want to say is don't use other people's sermons. Don't use other people's stories. It's so easy to do that now on the internet. And just a little example. My last associate at my last full-time church was 5 years younger than me, so about 60 years old, learning the craft, second career man. And his sermons were, well, one lay leader described them as lackluster. But I remember one time he started to copy some of my techniques. He improved over the years we worked together. But I remember the time I thought he finally turned the corner. He had a sermon, I told him afterward, was absolutely the best he did. Personal story in it of doing something with his kids on the floor. It grabbed people. It was terrific. Later that evening, I talked to my wife, who was a minister of music at a large Lutheran church, though an ordained United Methodist, and I was serving then in United Church of Christ Church, and she heard the same story about that pastor getting on the floor with his kids. And they obviously both took it, the Lutheran and the UCC, from the internet someplace, didn't credit it, lied, said it was them, their family, their children. We can't lie in presenting the gospel. We've got to have a little ethics, plus eventually that wears thin and people know you're using canned materials, or people feel it. It's okay to use other material you find, but credit it. As Bill Kunze said in one of his sermons, he told this joke, and so you tell it. That's okay, occasionally, but credit it. So your sermon's planned, using resources in an ethical, professional way. You're ready to prepare.